We've often heard that we need to communicate what we want to our partners and try to make it concrete because they can't just magically read our minds, right? But what if what we want is something that's a little harder to put our finger on, or it's something kind of feeling bigger? Like, let's say it's more about overall engagement in the relationship. In today's video, I have 6 steps for you in how to get this kind of need met, where what you want from your partner is something that feels a little less practical and concrete. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel I help you heal your attachment style and give you tips and strategies to make your relationships as healthy and fulfilling as possible. Okay, so let's say you are feeling like you have needs in your relationship, but they feel big. They feel kind of like they're really at this depth level or this level of almost feeling state and how you are with each other. So it's maybe about something more like being engaged in the relationship in a certain way, like where you feel their presence in the relationship or you feel like the engagement is coming from them, rather than something like you're wanting them to take more of a part in household tasks or something like that. That I'm just going to go for an example that feels very, very practical, right, as a contrast. So in the latter case, you can imagine that you would figure out what it is that could be helpful. You try to communicate positively with them in terms of how you say it and ask for it, and then you try to be very concrete and you make a plan and you check up on it. So you can sort of see the steps pretty easily once you've identified the problem and realized what a good, healthy kind of communication is. But how do you communicate something about engagement in the relationship, or like what you want on more that feeling state level, or that level that feels bigger or deeper? Okay, so step number 1 is to try to get as clear as possible on what it is that you really want. A lot of this can feel vague, and some of it can be that it's like a core wound getting activated, around not being seen, for example. And so it's really important to get clear about what it is you want, trying to make sure, that you're understanding that there may be some ways in which your partner's already giving it to you that you're not already receiving. So this gets into some of the other videos. I would recommend watching any of my or another person's videos around getting needs met and around core wounds to try to be working on some of this stuff, because that can help you get really clear on, whether you're sort of just not seeing or receiving what's happening in the relationship, or if it really is something that you're hoping to get more of. And, or maybe there's a little of both happening. But you want to really see what's really going on. And the main tip here is to really check in with your feelings and to trust them. Try to really go in and see what the actual feeling is without starting with what it is you think you want on any more level of words to start with. Because sometimes the feeling is something that doesn't kind of make full sense to us, and so we haven't really honed in on what it actually is that we want. And I think a helpful way to look at it in this particular case is to think of maybe what you're sort of longing for. It could feel like a pain point, but see if you can also feel into what it is you're longing for from this person. Like what is it that you sort of imagine like being the most beautiful state of the relationship. And don't worry about that being like a fantasy or unrealistic at this stage, because there's plenty of time in the later steps as you are going to be communicating this and working on it. There'll be plenty of time to engage with what that's actually going to look like in your relationship. So again, that first step to asking for what you need on this deeper, sort of more feeling state level from your partner is to really check in with yourself and figure out what it is you're really feeling without questioning it or doubting it, and what it is you're longing for in the relationship. And then number 2 is to be vulnerable. And I say this all the time about being vulnerable, but I feel like in this case, it's actually one of the hardest times to be vulnerable, because we're asking for something, a longing from our heart like that is a difficult thing to ask for, and really goes deep and like so open and naked and vulnerable. So you want to communicate that feeling state that you identified, and that what it is you're longing for. And this is going to go a long ways towards that part of the healthy communication in all interactions where you're communicating it in the positive. So it's even more vulnerable to communicate it this way, to say, this is what I'm longing for deep in my heart, rather than to say, this is what I'm not getting from the relationship, right? It's more vulnerable, but it's also that way of communicating in the positive and in a way that the other person then is going to be more likely to respond to. And of course, if you did it the other way, they would feel potentially blamed, or would go more the negative direction also. So you can go, instead of going the negative route, you don't even go neutral. You're actually really going to something that someone's going to respond to much more deeply because it's coming from the longing of your heart. And there's, a lot of different ways you could say this. I keep mentioning the word longing. It could be you saying, this is what I think would be so beautiful in our relationship. This is really what I want to share with you. You can make it really interactive like that, but just be really vulnerable. And that will already be a positive and engaging way of communicating this to your partner. Okay, number 3, and you could consider this at any point in the steps, really. So perhaps even before you communicate with your partner, but it'll be something that you do as you engage with this whole process, because this is a long-term process, right? This isn't something that's going to happen overnight, especially if it's something deeper and about shifting the way you interact with each other and are with each other, your way of being with each other in the relationship. It might take some time, right? So what I want you to do throughout the process, or possibly as the next step, is to check in with yourself. Are you in this feeling state already and way of interacting with the other person? Because it's all very well to communicate it, but the way that you are is also going to be how the other person responds to you. And this might sound easy, be loving if you want someone else to be loving. That may sound easy and obvious, but I think it can really hang people up, because I think people can really get stuck here, because I think we often want to feel like it's coming from the other person, and we get sort of stuck on that idea that it's going to come from the other person, and we want to make sure that we're not influencing it, like it's coming from them genuinely, that kind of thing. So that could influence both not communicating out loud to them, but it can even influence like what kind of feeling state we're in about it. Or if we feel like we're not going to get it, maybe that's some of those core wounds coming up again, then we might be actually in a very different kind of state. And if you think of it from that perspective, I think you can really see, if you're in a very different state from what you're hoping your partner will be in, that would be very difficult for them to do, because it's really an interaction, right? So if let's say you're in a really closed off state because you feel like they're not going to be in a loving state, well, I mean, how is someone supposed to interact with someone who's in a closed off state? I think you can see pretty quickly that's not going to work. But even just going from a neutral state to cultivating more of the state that you're hoping to receive can be really helpful. And I want to make a distinction here that that's not codependency. That's just cultivating what you want in the relationship. You're still going to separately consider, as you go along and work on it with your partner, if they're a good match for you in terms of what they can also bring to the relationship. If you kept it only at the level where you did, for example, did things for them in the hopes that they would do it back to you without really saying it, that kind of thing, that can start to go towards codependency. But right now we're actually talking about a state of being that actually is even bigger than just you and your partner. And like I said, you're still going to be considering where they're at in the relationship, as well as making it an overt, not a covert thing that you're actually interacting and communicating about. All right, so step number 4 is to still try to make it concrete. It just might look a little different than something like who's going to do the dishes on which day of the week, right? But you can still try to make it a bit more concrete, perhaps by imagining, what kinds of things might it look like? This is where that fantasy state and the imagining can really help, as long as you don't get tied down to exactly how it might look and you're not open to the fact that it might look a little different as it actually happens. It's almost like brainstorming, right? But in this more feeling state level. So imagine, what is it that you imagine that would look like? What would you be doing with your partner? How would you be communicating with each other? Maybe when you go into this imaginative state about it, you realize that you are always touching a little bit, like you have your arm on each other, even in just a casual interaction. So you might uncover something more that are pieces of what might be helpful for getting to this feeling and interactive state with your partner by doing this kind of imaginative work and pulling out some of these concrete details or noticing them. What is it you imagine doing together? Trying to come up with like many examples. How is it that you imagine you are together? Where are you in proximity with each other? Are you touching? What kinds of words are you saying to each other? Trying to get some of those ideas in hand, even though it's really about the deeper feeling state underneath, and there's lots of possibilities, can be very useful for getting something that's deeper and harder to pin down a little more concrete. And then you can share that as well, potentially, with your partner as some ideas if you are getting to that next step of brainstorming what it might look like. Remembering that you're sharing just some possibilities so that they might realize that too, that you're just saying, hey, I even sort of imagine it might look like this. And keep in mind too that it's helpful not to get stuck on any particular idea of how it might look if you're hoping that it will come from them. So invite them and say, I'm just saying this is one possibility. We can definitely do this kind of whatever it is activity, or try to, touch more, whatever that is. And you can say, but really it's about this feeling state. So I'm open to whatever ways that you might offer to try to get us into this feeling state as well. I think it could look a lot of different ways. And that also shows that you're very open like that to what they can bring, because really it's this two-way interaction between you. Okay, step number 5 is to catch it when it happens. So this is partly because positive reinforcement is a good thing, right? And people really appreciate feeling acknowledged, particularly certain attachment styles like dismissive avoidant. But in general, people appreciate acknowledgement too. But it's also important because it shows both you and them that this is an example of where you're in that feeling state. And so when you start to notice that more, that's beautiful for acknowledgement and also gratitude, which brings in more of it. But it's also important for realizing that these potentially are the ways that are how this deeper thing or this feeling state are going to show up in your relationship, because every relationship is different, right? And so it's this beautiful interaction between you, and you're really exploring in a lot of ways as you try to cultivate more of this together. And so as you make sure to notice, you're going to start to see what that really is for the two of you. So again, catching it when it happens, because it's very easy for us all in our busyness to not notice, and we tend to focus more on the negative just because of how our brain works than the positive. So noticing these positives, noticing if you even catch just a whiff of that feeling state, to acknowledge it to your partner and to be grateful for it, and also to start to be able to cultivate it even more because now you're seeing how it plays out in your relationship. And then just remembering, with that final and 5th tip especially, that it may look very different from what you've imagined already. Like I said, if you're hoping that it's something that's coming from your partner more, it will look different because they're a different person. So I think it'd be fantastic to actually appreciate and celebrate that some of how it might look when you're getting what you want in the relationship in these deeper and fulfilling ways, and really are in that feeling state that you were longing for, to appreciate that it's coming about in maybe some surprising and unexpected ways as well. Hopefully that was helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm trying to get these tips and strategies out to as many people as possible because I know we can all use help with making our relationships the best they can be.